In a peculiar way, the history of Joyce's literature, and indeed the history of literature in Ireland, seems to be very closely tied up with a history of copyright. Bram Stoker is the first major character who features with this, in that his widow was very, very anxious about who had the rights to perform the play, and she ordered all the 1922 F.W. Murnau film copies, Nosferatu, to be destroyed. In the case of Joyce, it's actually well after him. He had a lot of difficulty getting his books published initially. He went back and forth for about 5 years to Dublin and to different publishers trying to get Dubliners published. And when it came to Ulysses, his initial idea was to have it published by a tiny little bookshop in Paris, which isn't a publishing agent, called Shakespeare and Company. They produced the first copies of Ulysses, and maybe I hear some people say it was 100 copies and no more. When it comes to the rights to his work, we have to jump further forward in time. In 1941, Joyce died. By European Union copyright laws, 50 years from the death of a writer is the length of the term of the estate's control over the work, up until the laws were changed. So in 1991, the works of James Joyce became available, and you saw a rush of people producing plays and various different kinds of pieces of work arising from it. Bloomsday festivals became broader and had more performative elements in it. At this point, one of the person who was chiefly in control of the rights of Joyce's work was his grandson, Stephen Joyce, the son of Giorgio. Stephen Joyce, born in 1932, died this year past. He lost control of them in 1991, but about, I can't remember what it was it 4 years later, 5 years later, the rights came back into his control again, as the European Union law changed to be 70 years. I'm going to quietly blame Disney for that, because they're the ones who changed the copyright law here in the United States. Whoever is responsible. In the case of most of the writers, like W.B. Yeats, what had gone out of copyright was left out of copyright and nobody cared. Stephen Joyce, however, prosecuted heavily on it and had his agents vigilantly searching to ensure that nobody did try to attempt to perform the play without his permissions. Oftentimes, he charged exorbitant amounts of money in order to have to protect his grandfather's work in the way that it was meant to be. On his death, Michael D. Higgins spoke very nicely of him. As somebody who was involved in trying to create performances or readings of the book for the centenary in 2004, I would have been a little bit less favourable of him. Never met the man, so I'm not to be trusted. However, one of the things he did that was particularly odious and unpopular was the Irish government purchased letters and manuscripts of Joyce for, at the time, and certainly for the Irish government, an exorbitant sum in 2002-2003, with a view to being able to put them on display in our National Library. The scene where Scylla and Charybdis takes place, being able to put them exposed to the world to see. Obviously, you couldn't touch them, but they would be on exhibition there. Joyce tried to sue them and lost merrily in the Irish courts. Of course, 70 years were up by 2011, and since then there have been a rash of new productions and new explorations of Joyce's work. For me, as a theatre artist, I find it more exciting and more interesting and more engaging to be able to play with and explore texts after a respectable amount of time has passed. I think every work deserves its respect and to be taken for itself before anyone tries to revise it or reinterpret it. But the Joyce who wrote this book in 1922, nearly 100 years ago now, or finished the book in 1922, And the Joyce who died in 1941 lived in a very, very different world. In his day, the idea of Bloom being an outsider comes with his being Jewish. In the modern Ireland, that Bloom still exists, except now he's black or Asian. Irish, but also seen by some not to be. So I think it's important that after at least 70 years, maybe more, maybe less, depending on the writer, we have the freedom to re-explore and reinterpret that work. Now that it's fallen out of copyright, we can do that.
Those lovely seaside girls, all dimples, smiles and curls, your head it simply whirls. They look all right, complexions pink and white. They've diamond rings and dainty feet, golden hair from Regent Street, lace and grace and lots of face, those pretty little seaside girls.